Marcus Johnson woke up early that Tuesday morning with a plan in mind. The sun was barely peeking through his bedroom curtains as he prepared for the day ahead. At 45 years old, Marcus had built Skyline Airways from nothing into one of the country's most respected airlines. Today, however, he wouldn't be walking into the executive office wearing his tailored suit and polished shoes. Today, he would be just another passenger. "You sure about this, sir?" asked Richard, his personal assistant, as Marcus selected a simple pair of jeans and a plain blue button-up shirt from his closet. "Absolutely," Marcus replied, his voice firm with decision. "The only way to know what's really happening on our flights is to experience it as a customer." Marcus had done this twice before in the 15 years since founding Skyline. Each time, the experience had proved valuable, leading to important changes in service delivery. This time, his concerns stemmed from several customer complaints that had recently reached his desk. Some passengers had reported unfair treatment, with disturbing patterns that suggested racial bias might be involved. As the CDO buttoned his shirt, he looked at himself in the mirror. His dark skin contrasted with the blue fabric, and he ran a hand over his closely cropped hair, now showing touches of gray at the temples. He deliberately left his expensive watch at home and wore no jewelry except his simple wedding band. Flight 372 to Chicago, booked under the name Michael James, Richard reminded him, handing over the printed boarding pass. "Economy Plus, seat 14C. Marcus nodded. "Perfect, and the return flight." "Tomorrow evening, flight 447. First class this time, as you requested. Different crew entirely." Marcus had planned it carefully. Economy on the outbound flight, first class on the return. Different flight crews, different times of day. He wanted to see the full range of customer experiences. 3 hours later, Marcus sat in the airport terminal, blending in perfectly with the other travelers. No one gave him a second glance. He scrolled through news on his phone while occasionally observing the Skyline staff at the gate. So far, everything seemed normal. The boarding process went smoothly, and Marcus found himself in his window seat without incident. As the plane filled with passengers, Marcus noticed the flight attendants greeting people with varying degrees of warmth. One female attendant in particular, her name tag read Karen Miller, seemed especially attentive to certain passengers while barely acknowledging others. When an elderly white couple took their seats across the aisle, Karen immediately offered to help stow their bags and asked if they needed anything before takeoff. Yet, when a young black woman with a baby sat directly in front of Marcus, Karen simply walked past without offering assistance, despite the woman clearly struggling with her diaper bag and infant. Marcus made a mental note but kept his expression neutral. As CEO, he had implemented strict training protocols for all customer-facing staff. Witnessing this disparity firsthand was concerning, but he needed more observation before drawing conclusions. The flight took off on time, climbing steadily through clouds into clear blue skies. As the seatbelt sign turned off, Marcus watched Karen move efficiently through the cabin, starting the beverage service. He noticed a pattern forming. Karen's smile appeared and disappeared depending on who she was serving. Marcus pulled out his notebook, disguised as a travel journal, and began making discreet notes. This undercover mission was already revealing insights no executive report could capture. Little did he know, the most revealing moment of his investigation was yet to come, and it would test both his professionalism and his patience in ways he hadn't anticipated. The flight continued smoothly for the first hour. Marcus Johnson observed Karen Miller's interactions with passengers carefully, making small notes in his journal. The pattern he had noticed earlier became more obvious as time passed. Karen smiled brightly at the white passengers, asking them specific questions about their comfort. "Is the temperature okay for you?" she would ask, or "Can I bring you an extra pillow?" But when she reached rows with passengers of color, her smile faded. Her questions became short and direct. "Drink?" or "Anything else?" Sometimes she didn't ask at all, simply placing items on their trays without eye contact. Marcus shook his head slightly. In 15 years of building Skyline Airways, he had worked hard to create a company culture of respect and fairness. What he was seeing now troubled him deeply. When the beverage cart finally reached his row, Marcus straightened up and prepared to interact with Karen. She served the passenger to his left, a young white man in a business suit, with a warm smile and friendly chat about the man's destination. Then she turned to Marcus. Her smile disappeared instantly. "Something to drink?" she asked flatly, not meeting his eyes. "Yes, please. Could I have apple juice with no ice?" Marcus asked politely. Karen nodded without speaking and roughly placed a cup of orange juice on his tray. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice calm and professional. "I asked for apple juice, not orange." Karen's eyes narrowed slightly. "We're out of apple," she said quickly, already turning to serve the next row. Marcus noticed that the cart clearly had apple juice boxes visible. He made another note in his journal, deciding to see if this was a one-time mistake or part of a pattern. 20 minutes later, Marcus watched as Karen handed apple juice to a white woman 3 rows ahead. His suspicions grew stronger. As CEO of the airline, he had access to all inventory records and knew exactly what should be stocked on every flight. Running out of apple juice on a morning flight was highly unlikely. During the meal service, the pattern continued. White passengers received their meal choice, while several passengers of color, including Marcus, were told their preferred option was no longer available. When a young Indian family asked for extra napkins, Karen seemed annoyed and tossed them on their tray. When an elderly white couple made the same request minutes later, she handed them a stack with a warm smile. Marcus continued taking notes, filling several pages with specific examples of differential treatment. As an experienced business leader, he knew the importance of documenting everything thoroughly before taking action. 2 hours into the flight, Marcus noticed something even more concerning. A young black mother with a crying baby was trying to get Karen's attention. The baby needed a diaper change, and the mother was looking for assistance to navigate to the bathroom. Karen walked past her 3 times, ignoring her raised hand. Finally, Marcus pressed his call button. When Karen approached, her face showed clear annoyance. "What?" she asked sharply. "I believe the woman with the baby needs some assistance," Marcus said calmly, pointing to the struggling mother. Karen's lips tightened. "I'll get to her when I can," she said coldly. "I think she needs help now," Marcus insisted politely. "It seems urgent." Karen leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper only Marcus could hear. "Look, if you people would just learn to handle your own problems instead of always expecting special treatment." She didn't finish her sentence, but she didn't need to. The prejudice behind her words was clear. Marcus felt a chill run through him. This was exactly what he had feared might be happening on his airline. As Karen walked away, Marcus looked down at his journal. The evidence was mounting, and a confrontation seemed inevitable. What happened next would test his character in ways he hadn't expected when he boarded the flight that morning. The flight entered its 3rd hour. Marcus Johnson sat quietly in his seat, still processing Karen's whispered comment. As the CEO of Airline Airways, he had implemented strict anti-discrimination policies, but clearly, they weren't being followed. He decided to test the situation one more time before drawing final conclusions. Marcus pressed his call button again. 5 minutes passed, 10 minutes, 15. Other flight attendants walked by, but the light above his seat remained on, ignored. 20 minutes turned into 30. Passengers around him began to notice. "She's ignoring you on purpose," whispered the elderly woman across the aisle. "I've seen her do this to others too." Finally, after almost 35 minutes, Karen appeared at his row. Her face showed clear irritation. "Yes," she asked coldly. "I pressed the call button half an hour ago," Marcus said calmly. "I'd like some apple juice, please." Karen's eyes narrowed. "I already told you we're out of apple juice." "That's interesting," Marcus replied, keeping his voice steady, "because I just saw you serve apple juice to several passengers in the front rows." The passengers nearby grew quiet, listening to the exchange. Karen seemed to notice the attention and lowered her voice. "Fine, I'll check if we have any left." She returned a few minutes later with a glass of apple juice, practically slamming it on his tray table. Some of the juice splashed onto Marcus's notebook. "Thank you," Marcus said politely, wiping his notebook with a napkin. "Could I also have some water, please?" Karen's face tightened. "Anything else?" Her voice dripped with sarcasm. "No, that will be all. Thank you for your service," Marcus replied, deliberately emphasizing the word service. Karen turned to leave, then stopped. Something about Marcus's calm confidence seemed to bother her. She turned back. You know what? She said, her voice rising slightly. I'm tired of people like you thinking you deserve special treatment just because you complain. Marcus remained calm. I don't want special treatment. I just want the same service everyone else is receiving. Oh, please, Karen scoffed. You people are always looking for something to complain about. The cabin grew uncomfortably quiet. Several passengers looked up from their books and screens. Excuse me? Marcus asked. What do you mean by you people? Karen's face flushed red. You know exactly what I mean. Marcus took a deep breath. As CEO, he had faced challenging situations before, but being on the receiving end of such blatant prejudice from his own employee was something new. Actually, I'd like to know exactly what you mean by that comment, he said firmly. As a paying customer on this airline, I believe I deserve an explanation. Karen seemed to snap. In one quick motion, she picked up the glass of apple juice and deliberately poured it directly onto Marcus's face and shirt. The cold liquid splashed down his face, soaking his shirt and pants. There's your explanation, she hissed. Next time, know your place and don't question the staff. Gasps echoed throughout the cabin. Several passengers pulled out their phones, recording the incident. Marcus sat perfectly still, juice dripping from his chin onto his soaked shirt. I want your employee number and full name, Marcus said quietly, wiping juice from his eyes. Karen smirked. Karen Miller, employee number 4582. Go ahead and report me. No one will believe you anyway. She turned to walk away, clearly thinking she had won the confrontation. Little did she know that the man she had just doused with juice wasn't just any passenger. A senior flight attendant rushed over with napkins. Sir, I'm so sorry, she said, clearly horrified by her colleague's behavior. This is completely unacceptable. I'll get the captain immediately. Marcus nodded calmly, accepting the napkins. Thank you. I'd appreciate that. As he dabbed the juice from his clothes, Marcus knew that the next few hours would change Karen Miller's life forever. And possibly, they would change Skyline Airways for the better. The cabin fell into shocked silence. Apple juice dripped from Marcus Johnson's face onto his soaked shirt. For a moment, no one moved. Then suddenly, everyone seemed to react at once. I got that all on video, called out a young woman 3 rows back, holding up her phone. That was assault, an older man in a business suit exclaimed. Someone should call the police when we land, another passenger suggested. Marcus remained surprisingly calm. He continued wiping his face with the napkins the senior flight attendant had brought him. His expensive shirt was ruined, but that was the least of his concerns right now. The senior flight attendant, whose name tag read Michelle, looked horrified. Sir, I cannot express how sorry I am. This is absolutely not what Skyline Airways stands for. If only she knew who she was talking to, Marcus thought. Karen had retreated to the back of the plane, but not before shooting Marcus one last contemptuous look. She clearly thought she had put him in his place and wasn't worried about consequences. Sir, would you like to change your shirt? I can check if we have a company polo in your size, Michelle offered, still trying to manage the situation. That would be helpful, thank you, Marcus replied. As Michelle went to find a clean shirt, passengers from nearby rows came over to offer support. I've been watching her all flight, said a gray-haired woman in a floral dress. The way she's been treating people of color versus white passengers is disgusting. I'll be a witness for you if needed. Here's my business card, said a man in a suit. I'm an attorney. What she did was clearly assault, and the racial component makes it worse. Marcus thanked them all, collecting several business cards and contact information from witnesses. He wasn't planning to sue anyone. He owned the airline, after all, but the support from these strangers warmed his heart. It reminded him that while some people might harbor prejudice, many more stood against it. Michelle returned with a Skyline Airways polo shirt. It might be a bit big, but it's dry, she said apologetically. Thank you, Marcus replied. Is there somewhere I can change? You can use the first-class lavatory. It's larger, Michelle suggested, leading him to the front of the plane. As Marcus changed his shirt in the small bathroom, he looked at himself in the mirror. Juice had dried in his short hair and on his face. He washed as best he could with paper towels. The airline polo was indeed too large, but it was better than his soaked button-up. When he returned to his seat, he found that someone had cleaned his area. His juice-soaked notebook had been carefully dried, and fresh napkins had been placed on his tray. "The captain would like to speak with you after we land," Michelle informed him quietly. "He's been made aware of the situation." Marcus nodded. "Thank you. I'd appreciate that." For the remainder of the flight, Karen stayed at the back of the plane. Other flight attendants took over her duties, all of them extremely attentive to Marcus and apologetic about what had happened. The passengers around him continued to offer support. "My daughter works for Skyline Corporate," said a woman across the aisle. "She always says they take discrimination very seriously. That woman will be fired for sure." Marcus just smiled and nodded. "I certainly hope the company addresses it appropriately," he said. When the plane began its descent, Marcus looked out the window at the approaching city below. He had come on this flight to evaluate service quality, and he had certainly gotten more insight than he had bargained for. As the wheels touched down on the runway, Marcus felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. It was a text from Richard, his assistant. "Hope your flight was uneventful. Car waiting at arrival gate." Marcus smiled slightly as he typed his reply. "Flight was very educational. Have legal team stand by, and tell Sarah in HR to clear her afternoon schedule." The plane taxied to the gate. Marcus remained in his seat as other passengers began collecting their belongings. Several stopped to give him their contact information or express support. The confrontation with Karen was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. As passengers filed off the plane, Captain James Rogers approached Marcus's seat. The captain, a tall man with graying hair and a serious expression, extended his hand. "Sir, I understand there was an incident with one of our flight attendants. On behalf of Skyline Airways, I want to personally apologize." Marcus shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Captain. I appreciate that." "Michelle told me what happened," the captain continued. "This is completely unacceptable behavior. We'd like you to speak with our customer service team at the gate. They'll take your statement and contact information." Marcus nodded. "Actually, Captain, I'd like to speak with the entire flight crew before I leave the aircraft. Is that possible?" The captain looked surprised by this unusual request but nodded. "Of course, sir. We can use the first-class cabin once all passengers have deplaned." As the last passengers left, Marcus collected his belongings and moved to the empty first-class section. Michelle and two other flight attendants waited there, looking nervous. Karen stood apart from the group, arms crossed defensively across her chest. She rolled her eyes when she saw Marcus. "This is ridiculous," Karen muttered. "We're going to be late for our next flight because this man can't handle a little spilled juice." Captain Rogers shot her a stern look. "That's enough, Karen. You've already created enough problems today." When everyone was gathered, Marcus stood tall and addressed the group. "Thank you all for meeting with me. My name isn't actually Michael James as it says on my boarding pass." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, removing his company ID card. "My name is Marcus Johnson. I'm the CEO and founder of Skyline Airways." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's face drained of all color. Her arms, previously crossed confidently across her chest, dropped to her sides. Michelle gasped audibly. The other flight attendants exchanged shocked glances. That's not possible," Karen stammered, her voice suddenly small. "You're lying." Captain Rogers took the ID card Marcus offered, examined it carefully, then looked up with wide eyes. "It's authentic. This is CEO Johnson." Karen looked like she might faint. I didn't. Every few months, I fly on my own airline as a regular passenger," Marcus explained calmly. "I do this to experience our service firsthand, to see what our customers experience. Today's flight has been educational." Michelle stepped forward. "Mr. Johnson, I cannot express how mortified we all are. Karen's actions do not represent Skyline's values." Marcus nodded. "I know, Michelle. I wrote those values myself 15 years ago when I founded this company." He turned to face Karen directly. "Ms. Miller, how long have you worked for Skyline Airways?" Karen's lips trembled as she answered. 7 years, sir." 7 years, Marcus repeated thoughtfully. "So you've been through our anti-discrimination training at least 7 times, correct? The training that I personally helped develop." Karen's eyes filled with tears. "Please, I need this job. I have bills to pay." You should have thought about that before you poured juice on a passenger's face, Captain Rogers said firmly. Marcus held up his hand. Captain, if you don't mind, I'd like to handle this. He turned back to Karen. I'm not going to fire you right here on this plane, Ms. Miller. Relief flooded Karen's face, but Marcus continued. That doesn't mean there won't be consequences. I'll be meeting with the head of HR this afternoon. You are suspended without pay, effective immediately, pending a full investigation. But, Karen began. The incident was recorded by several passengers. Marcus interrupted. And the plane's security cameras capture everything in the cabin. There will be a thorough review. Captain Rogers stepped forward. Karen, please gather your personal belongings. You won't be continuing to the next destination with this crew. As Karen left to collect her things, tears streaming down her face, Marcus turned to the rest of the crew. I'd like to thank the rest of you for your professionalism today. Michelle, your response to the situation was excellent. Michelle nodded, still looking shocked by the revelation of who Marcus really was. As the crew prepared to disembark, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Car waiting at employee exit. HR team assembled for 2 p.m. meeting. Marcus looked once more at the Skyline Airways logo on the cabin wall. The company he had built with dedication and hard work. Today had shown him that there was still work to be done. Marcus Johnson's private car pulled up to Skyline Airways headquarters at precisely 1:45 p.m. He had gone home briefly to shower and change into a fresh suit, removing all traces of apple juice from his skin and hair. Now, as he walked through the main entrance of the building he had designed himself, employees greeted him with their usual respect, unaware of what had happened on Flight 372 just hours earlier. Good afternoon, Mr. Johnson, said the receptionist with a bright smile. The HR team is waiting for you in conference room A. Thank you, Diane, Marcus replied. He took the elevator to the executive floor, his mind still processing the morning's events. When he entered the conference room, 5 people were already seated around the large table. Sarah Chen, the head of HR, stood to greet him. Mr. Johnson, we've assembled as you requested, she said, looking concerned. Richard mentioned there was an incident on your flight today. Marcus nodded. Let's wait for one more person before we begin. As if on cue, the door opened and Karen Miller walked in, escorted by a security officer. She looked completely different from the confident, disdainful flight attendant of the morning. Her eyes were red and puffy. Her uniform was wrinkled. She froze when she saw Marcus sitting at the head of the table. Ms. Miller, please take a seat, Marcus said, gesturing to an empty chair. Karen sat down slowly, her hands shaking. The security officer remained by the door. For those who don't know what happened today, Marcus began, I was on Flight 372 this morning, traveling as a regular passenger under an assumed name. Ms. Miller was working as a flight attendant on that flight. He recounted the events calmly and factually, describing the pattern of discriminatory treatment he had observed, culminating in Karen pouring apple juice on him deliberately. We have collected statements from 12 passengers and 3 crew members, Sarah Chen said, opening a folder. We also have video recordings from several passengers and the plane's security cameras. This is grounds for immediate termination, said James Wilson, the legal director. What Ms. Miller did constitutes assault, and the racial component makes it even more serious. She has violated company policy on multiple levels. Karen started to cry quietly in her seat. I understand that, James, Marcus said. And you're right. By all standard procedures, Ms. Miller should be fired immediately. Please. Karen spoke up, her voice breaking. Mr. Johnson, I made a terrible mistake. I don't. You're not what, Ms. Miller? Marcus asked, his voice firm but not unkind. Not racist. The evidence suggests otherwise. Karen looked down at her hands. I have bills to pay. My mother is sick. I need this job. Marcus considered her for a long moment. The room was silent except for Karen's quiet sniffling. Ms. Miller, I built this company from nothing 15 years ago, Marcus said finally. I created Skyline Airways with a clear mission, to provide excellent service to all passengers, regardless of their background, appearance, or identity. When you poured juice on me, you weren't just assaulting me as an individual. You were attacking the very foundation of what this company stands for. Karen nodded miserably, tears falling onto the conference table. The easy solution would be to fire you and issue a public statement condemning your actions, Marcus continued. It would satisfy the public's demand for justice, and legally, it would protect the company. But that wouldn't solve the bigger problem, would it? Marcus leaned forward. It wouldn't address why a 7-year employee who has gone through our training repeatedly would still harbor such prejudice. Sarah Chen looked at Marcus with surprise. Sir, are you suggesting we don't terminate Ms. Miller's employment? Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. What happened today reveals a failure not just by Ms. Miller, but by our company, he said thoughtfully. Our training clearly isn't effective enough. Our culture isn't strong enough. Simply firing one employee won't fix that. He turned back to face the room. I'm not excusing what Ms. Miller did, but I believe we have an opportunity here to create real change rather than just punishment. Karen looked up, confusion mixing with the faintest hint of hope in her eyes. Here's what we're going to do, Marcus said, his decision made. The executives around the table leaned forward, ready to implement whatever plan their CEO had devised. The next morning, Marcus arrived at his office earlier than usual. The events from yesterday still weighed heavily on his mind. He had made a bold decision in that conference room, one that not everyone agreed with. As he sipped his coffee and looked out over the city skyline, his assistant Richard knocked on the door. The PR team just sent over the draft statement for your approval, Richard said, placing a folder on Marcus's desk. And Miss Chen from HR is waiting outside. Marcus nodded. Send Sarah in, please. Sarah Chen entered the office looking tired but determined. Good morning, Mr. Johnson. I've been working since yesterday evening on the new program you proposed. What's the reaction from the executive team? Marcus asked directly. Sarah hesitated. Mixed, to be honest. James from legal thinks we're taking an unnecessary risk. He believes terminating Ms. Miller would be cleaner and send a stronger message. And what do you think, Sarah? Marcus asked, genuinely interested in her opinion. I think it's bold, she answered. Risky, yes, but potentially transformative if we get it right. Marcus smiled slightly. That's exactly what I'm hoping for. He opened the folder Richard had brought in and read over the public statement. It outlined what had happened on Flight 372 without naming Karen Miller directly. It acknowledged that a Skyline employee had engaged in discriminatory behavior and assault against a passenger who turned out to be the CEO. Most importantly, it announced the creation of a new diversity and inclusion initiative that would transform the company's approach to training. Is Ms. Miller here? Marcus asked. Sarah nodded. She's waiting in conference room B. She's still in shock that she wasn't fired immediately. Let's not keep her waiting, then, Marcus said, standing up. When they entered the conference room, Karen Miller looked up with red-rimmed eyes. She was dressed in civilian clothes rather than her Skyline uniform. Good morning, Ms. Miller, Marcus said, taking a seat across from her. Mr. Johnson, Karen replied quietly. I still don't understand why I'm here instead of collecting my final paycheck. Marcus placed a document on the table between them. This is what we're calling the Accountability and Growth Agreement. It's never been used before at Skyline because we've never had a situation quite like this one. Karen looked at the document nervously but didn't touch it. Yesterday, you committed an act that would justify immediate termination, Marcus explained calmly. But firing you would be the easy way out, for both the company and for you. Instead, Sarah Chen continued, we're offering you a choice. Option 1 is standard termination. You leave today with 2 weeks' pay, and we part ways. Option 2, Marcus said, is more complicated. You accept a 6-month suspension without pay. During that time, you will help us develop and then participate in our new comprehensive anti-bias training program. You will work closely with our diversity consultants to understand the impact of your actions. You will share your story, anonymously at first, then eventually under your own name if you choose, as a teaching tool for other employees. Karen's eyes widened. You want me to help create training? Yes, Marcus said firmly. Because who better to explain how bias affects behavior than someone who has confronted their own bias? But why would you trust me with this? Karen asked, genuinely confused. After what I did. Marcus leaned forward. Ms. Miller, do you know why I started this airline 15 years ago? Karen shook her head. I was a frequent business traveler at another airline. Over 3 years, I was consistently treated differently from white passengers. Questioned about my first-class tickets, seated last, served last. Small indignities that added up over time. Marcus's voice remained steady as he continued. I didn't start Skyline just to make money. I started it to create an airline where everyone would be treated with equal dignity. Karen looked down at her hands, and I failed at that completely. Yes, you did, Marcus agreed. But now you have a chance to help fix the problem instead of just being removed from it. He pushed the document closer to her. The choice is yours, Ms. Miller. Termination or transformation. What will it be? Karen stared at the document for a long moment. Then, with a shaking hand, she reached for the pen. 6 months had passed since that fateful flight. The summer heat had given way to autumn crispness, and Skyline Airways headquarters buzzed with activity. In Training Room C, 25 new flight attendants sat in a semicircle, their fresh uniforms perfectly pressed, their faces eager and attentive. At the front of the room stood 2 people, Marcus Johnson, the CEO, and beside him, Karen Miller. Good morning, everyone, Marcus began. Today marks the graduation of your training program, but it also marks another important milestone. Today is the official launch of Skyline's Equality in the Air initiative. The new employees applauded politely, though some looked confused about why the CEO himself was addressing their training session. 6 months ago, Marcus continued, an incident occurred on one of our flights that could have torn this company apart. Instead, we chose to use it as an opportunity for growth and change. He gestured to Karen, who stepped forward. She looked different now, more humble, but also more confident in a different way. The arrogance was gone, replaced with something that looked like genuine purpose. My name is Karen Miller, she began, her voice steady. 6 months ago, I poured apple juice on a passenger's face because of my own prejudice. That passenger turned out to be Mr. Johnson. Gasps filled the room. Some of the trainees had heard rumors about the incident, but many were hearing the full story for the first time. I had worked for Skyline for 7 years, Karen continued. I went through all the required training. I could recite the company's anti-discrimination policies word for word. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing certain passengers as people deserving equal respect. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I expected to be fired that day. I deserved to be fired. Instead, Mr. Johnson offered me a choice: leave the company or help fix the problem I represented. Marcus stepped forward again. What Ms. Miller didn't know was that several other incidents had been reported over the previous year. Her case was the most extreme, but not the only one. It became clear that our training approach wasn't working as intended. Karen nodded. For the past 6 months, I've worked with experts in bias training, psychologists, and diversity consultants. Together, we've completely rebuilt Skyline's approach to training. On the large screen behind them, images appeared showing the new training materials. Unlike the old program's dry presentations and checkbox exercises, the new approach included immersive scenarios, real-world examples, and personal testimonials. The old training told employees what not to do, Marcus explained. The new program helps them understand why it matters and how to actively practice inclusion. A young trainee raised her hand. Ms. Miller, do you still work as a flight attendant? Karen smiled slightly. Not yet. My suspension ends today. Starting next week, I'll be back on flights, but I'll also continue working with the training team. Another trainee looked confused. But sir, he said, addressing Marcus, wouldn't it have been easier to just fire her and make a public example? The company faced criticism for keeping her employed. Marcus nodded. Easier? Definitely. But at Skyline, we don't aim for what's easy. We aim for what's right, and sometimes the right path is the harder one. He walked to the center of the room. In the past 6 months, our new training has been tested with 500 employees. Customer satisfaction scores are up by 15%. Complaints about discriminatory treatment are down by 70%. The program Ms. Miller helped develop is working better than we could have hoped. Karen stepped forward again. I made a terrible mistake. I hurt someone because of my own prejudice. I can't erase that, but I can help make sure it doesn't happen again. As the session ended and the new employees filed out, a reporter who had been allowed to observe approached Marcus. Mr. Johnson, 6 months ago you faced criticism for not firing Karen Miller immediately. Do you regret that decision? Marcus looked across the room where Karen was speaking earnestly with a small group of trainees. Not for a moment, he replied. In business, we'd often talk about turning problems into opportunities, but we rarely apply that thinking to people. Karen made a mistake that revealed a larger problem in our company. Now she's part of the solution. The reporter nodded thoughtfully, jotting down his words. The easy path would have been to fire one person and pretend the problem was solved, Marcus concluded. But real leadership isn't about taking the easy path. It's about creating a better one.